Iran, India, the Turkish state, Turkey, thanks to its Ottoman heritage. These are core civilizational states in the world. They represent much more than just their own nation state. They represent thousands of years of culture and history. So none of these states under any circumstances are going to surrender their sovereignty. But we need to understand that for Iran, this is existential. Remember what President Trump said about this initially. Oh, this is just a journey. This is a journey. In other words, it's not existential for us. A journey in which we've decided that we're going to bring a nation of 93 million people to its knees. We're going to destroy its way of life, its existence. But for us, it's just a journey. Well, why is it just a journey for us? Because it's a journey for Israel. And that's the problem. This is the problem that people don't understand. We cannot solve Israel's strategic problems militarily, which is what we're being asked to do right now. Israel was already widely disliked, if not treated as a pariah in the region anyway. Now, the rest of the Islamic world sees Israel as this menace, this virus that is going to ultimately destroy all of them. And all you have to do is look at the map of Greater Israel. The map of Greater Israel includes much of Saudi Arabia, northern Iraq, Syria, Jordan, the Sinai, and some territory west of the Nile, and of course, at least half of Lebanon. And all of this is part of so-called Greater Israel. Well, we used to have something during World War II called Greater Germany, Großdeutschland. This was the expanded Germany. Ultimately, that actually made more sense than what we're seeing, because at least there were Germans living on the territory, not always in the majority, but there. In this case, we're talking about whole populations that have to be subjected to Gaza treatment. They're going to have to be effectively subjugated, enslaved, or driven out. This is insane. And this is what we are fighting for. People need to understand this. And I don't see any evidence that it could possibly exist. We've always had the objective of gaining control of the oil fields in the region. You've got to go back into the 1990s and go back and read the things that Richard Pearl and Paul Wolfowitz and a host of others in their group of neocons were writing and insisting that if we could control all the oil resources in the Middle East, then we would have China by the throat. Of course, the real intention was not just to have China by the throat, but to make Israel the undisputed champion and king of the Middle East. I don't think we're going to ever get China by the throat, nor do I think we as Americans need to do that. That's absurd. But I think we're back to where we were before. This is all about Israel and securing it and making it safe and putting it in charge of the whole region. All of this is going to fail. It has no chance of success. And this business of bombing a nation into the Stone Age, I must say, I do disagree with one thing you said. You said, well, Dresden, we can't do what we did there. No, I think we can. And I think the Iranians know this. And their cities already show evidence for it. We're doing things that we have not done since the Second World War or Vietnam. And one could argue that our bombings, both we and the Royal Air Force during World War II, committed war crimes. And you can make the argument that we did the same thing in Vietnam. And I think we're going to do the same thing here. Ultimately, you end up destroying power. You put hospitals out of business. The Israelis have been bombing hospitals in Iran and emergency centers ever since the war began. And they launched a number of strikes last night, I think because they worry that they might end up facing a ceasefire. I don't think there's any chance of a ceasefire coming. I think what they're going to end up facing is something worse than they've already encountered from Iran and potentially others that support Iran. He's in this escalatory trap. He doesn't know how to do anything else but bully. So what he's trying to do is bully once again. Remember, we talked about, if it fails, what else do you do? Well, you escalate, you escalate, you escalate. You could turn around and say, well, escalation isn't the answer. But there's no one telling him to do that as far as I can tell. And I certainly don't see great evidence for people standing up in the Department of Defense and telling him, sir, this is not going to work. And if you do this, we could end up in a much wider war with a lot of other people. And by the way, we mentioned escalation beyond the borders of the Eastern Hemisphere? In other words, could there be escalation here in the Western Hemisphere against us? And the answer is yes. The drug cartels, which have always been the real threat to us in Mexico, are for hire, and they have an interest in seeing to it that they continue to move drugs and people back and forth across our borders and coastal waters. So could they possibly cooperate with Iran? Absolutely, without question. There are already Hezbollah chapters down in Mexico. They've never taken any action against us, but they exist. The Sunni chapters, the ISIS / Al-Qaeda, Al-Nusra crowd, they've been much more active in Mexico. But all of these things could blow up in our faces inside our country. They could destroy our refineries, our oil infrastructure. What about our nuclear power plants? Could they cause accidents there? There are a whole range of things. And we have not done what we need to do to secure our own infrastructure. We started under Obama, and Obama diverted all of the money that was supposed to go into modernization of the power grid and other things into the pockets of his campaign supporters. So we didn't get much out of it. We really do need to pay attention to our own domestic infrastructure, particularly our electrical grid, our power grid. So, yeah, I think that could happen.
And, of course, you talk about who is President Trump listening to. He got rid of, or at least Joe Kent left, so that was one voice of reason that is no longer even in the mix. He had been sidelined since last October anyway. But here's one who is like upfront and possible. Gary, let's go with Lindsey Graham, number 2 here, because he thinks that this is a defining moment.
Don't be fooled about who the hell you're dealing with here. You're dealing with people that would use a nuclear weapon if they could get it, and they were trying to get it. They've been cheating for years, and God bless Donald Trump for stopping them from having a breakout so they could build 8 or 10 nuclear bombs, and one day they would have used them. So we're going to have one of two scenarios: capitulation of their desire to rain terror on the world through diplomacy, or we're going to have a massive military attack destroying this regime's capability to ever wage war again.
I think you know what he's leaning toward. He wants that devastating military attack. And then he said this.
There is no commercial purpose for 60% enriched uranium. We need to get our hands on that. They need to give it to us, or we need to take it. As to the Strait of Hormuz, when this is over, if they have the ability to control the straits in the future, I think the world will have failed, and I don't think Trump's going to let that happen. The idea that they control the straits in the future has got to be off the table. The idea that they can come back as the largest state sponsor of terrorism has to be off the table. That they can never have a nuke, they can never make missiles to threaten us in the region has to be off the table.
So, I mean, he's just laid out right there, especially in that last part. Only a regime change is an outcome that he can live with. They can't be control of the Strait of Hormuz. They can't be allowed to have nuclear material. They can't, all these things. The only way that can be accomplished is if you completely defeat the regime itself. And without a land army to go in and do that, how's that even theoretically possible, Doug?
Well, I think we have to go back and understand something. He has benefited from Israeli largesse in the community here in the United States. He is a strong spokesman for their interests. And back again to the original point, this is the Israeli agenda. Somebody needs to stand up and ask the question, why should this be our agenda? We've traded on lies and misrepresentation of events and people for 40 plus years with Iran. Every time the Iranians approached us and hoped to establish some sort of improved relationship, our friends in the Israel lobby and the billionaires that back them have intervened to stop it. So now they have the war they think they want. The danger, though, is very, very clear. If we were to embark on as this man wants us to, on this total destruction plan, total war against Iran, we are inviting future nuclear strikes against the United States. I think that's what we need to understand. We're not going to be able to strike anybody with impunity. And I think the Chinese and the Russians have made that clear. And I don't see any evidence that they want a war with us. But if they think that Israel is going to employ a nuclear weapon, let alone us, then I think all bets are off. And right now, the entire region is turning decisively against us and Israel. Most of the world is. I mean, this nonsense of we're going to fix it all for the world. They don't care about the world. There's no evidence that we give a damn what's happening. The rest of the world is on the road to depression, economic depression, Dan. You've got to look at the trillions of dollars of wealth being destroyed in the Asian markets. You have to look at the global South and understand the consequences for them. They do not have vast reserves of oil or cash. They're going to go under. Our friends in Japan and Korea are all going to go under financially as a result of this. This is not ending Iran as a state or a nation, contrary to popular belief, but it's putting us in the grave as far as our international standing goes, our potential to do business with others. We are going to be thoroughly and completely isolated in economic terms as well as political and military terms in the near future as a result of what we're doing. And people in the United States don't know it. They don't understand it. Wall Street was described this morning by someone who was pointing to all of the indicators and said it's complacent. They don't get it. People think that we control the world. We don't. And we're going to get a hard lesson on that topic very soon.
And, you talk about the oil and the impact it could have. I mean, this is one of the other things that's talking about is that the Houthis are saying if you launch this tonight, then that may be their trigger to close the Bab al-Mandab Strait. And that would just add yet another major choke point onto global shipping on top of the Strait of Hormuz. And now then you have an increasing percentage that would be cut off. And a lot of people, especially Saudi Arabia, has already been using that as a bypass to the strait. What would that do if the Houthis made good on that, even with Iranian help, which I guess they could do, and to close the Bab al-Mandab also?
Well, you recollect the pipeline that ran along what we called during Desert Storm the Pipeline Road.
I remember that.
Yeah. That pipeline can be destroyed at any point in time, anytime the Iranians want to do it. They don't necessarily have to destroy Jeddah or any of the ports on the Red Sea. They can simply destroy that pipeline. Most of the pipelines that are headed north are not functioning now anyway. So the Europeans are really in a desert right now when it comes to oil without oil. I think it's very hard for people to understand that once you close off the Red Sea, that adds several million more barrels of oil offline every day. You're really putting Europe into an impossible position. And we've got to go back. This is not all entirely Trump. I mean, Trump has certainly reinforced failure and made things much worse. But if you go back to the Biden administration was instrumental in destroying the Nord Stream pipeline. And everybody cheered. This is a wonderful thing. We're liberating Europe from Russian blackmail and potential control and influence. It's all crap. And as a result, Europe is being deindustrialized. The population's living standards are falling. Now, on top of that, with the oil not showing up so that you have virtually no energy, unless you burn coal or you can rapidly restore nuclear power stations. That's happening, by the way, in Japan, and I think also in Korea. Without that sort of thing, you're not going to have any power for a very long time. So you're moving into a global depression. So while Trump thinks this is all about him, he thinks this is about his victory, his need to dominate in order to fulfill his promises and obligations to the Israel lobby and its billionaire supporters. It's not. It's about humanity. It's about the people that live on this planet who are going to be suffering for decades as a result of this insanity. And that suffering is going to include famines because the necessary fertilizer isn't available. Russia can't make up the difference. Neither can China. So there is no appreciation for the larger consequences that will ensue from what President Trump is now threatening. But no one is going to tell him that. Nobody there cares. Why? Who is advising the president? Look at them. Who are they? Where did they come from? What do they know? And you can answer your own question. Have you ever run into an Air Force officer that did not believe in his heart of hearts that with enough bombs and enough missiles and enough rockets that the Air Force can't win everything? Have you? I never have. Every Air Force officer I've ever known, that's an article of faith. If you'll just give us all the money, give us all the munitions, all the missiles, all the aircraft we want, we can win any war, anywhere, at any time. I've listened to that for years. So forget the military advice. It's going to be catastrophic. So what does that bring you to? It brings you back to the people that are in the inner circle who are advising him that he's winning and can continue. A lot of things to end the war in Ukraine quickly. While I was working for him in 2020, I said, Iran is a potential strategic partner. We should not look upon them as the enemy and so forth. All of that fell on deaf ears. Remember, he surrounded himself with these New York City billionaires who are all very loyal to the Israeli agenda. And he took a lot of money from these people in order to be elected as president of the United States. So I think when he was elected, he knew that at some point he was going to have to deliver on the promises he made. So I don't think he was really fully apprised of what was going on. Iran, a nation of 93 million, half the size of India, is not going to surrender to anybody. There's no reason why they should. They can absorb a lot of punishment, and they have. And they've demonstrated a new way of war, the 21st century way of war, which is linking space-based intelligence and reconnaissance to numerous strike weapons all over the country, enabling them in the space of a few minutes to concentrate enormous firepower wherever they want to put it. That's why any talk right now about invading Iran is absurd. Any talk about seizing islands in the Persian Gulf is an invitation to disaster.
Yeah.
No one has to sit on those islands to defend them. They can attack them from numerous locations inside Iran.
Okay, go ahead. Because he was on the point of the missiles, Abhishek. There's a report and different reports coming out. I have one specific report, and because he's a war veteran and he knows a thing or two about these missiles, I have a report here with me, Colonel, and I'm going to read out a few details from this report. It's a UK a research think tank called RUSI, which has put out the report specifically on Israel. The Arrow 2 munitions depletion date projected 27th of March, which is today, which means they will have no more Arrow 2, Arrow 3 missiles. A defensive, THAAD, the THAAD's projected depletion date 3rd of April 2026 as per the UK think tank. Offensive, the Blue Sparrow air-launched ballistic missile projected depletion date 5th of April 2026. David Sling Stunner projected depletion date 6th of April. Rampage supersonic missile projected depletion date 9th of April. And it goes on and on. What it tells you, and it corresponds, Abhishek and Colonel, with the pictures that are coming out of Tel Aviv. We don't see pictures of the Iron Dome or the interceptions happening anymore. There seems to be a real problem that Israel is facing.
Yeah, I'm familiar with the report. I read it. If anything, they're being generous in that report to all of us. Israel's position is extremely delicate right now. They have virtually no air and missile defense whatsoever. 8 out of every 10 missiles and virtually most so-called drones are penetrating without opposition. So Israel is really in very bad shape. Now, as far as we're concerned, we need to keep in mind that all of the very expensive radars that we had installed across the region have been destroyed, which means we have great difficulty picking up on a lot of these missiles that are shot at us until, frankly, they're almost on top of us. And then finally, remember that we're 7,000 miles away from the United States. So when you're replenishing your stocks, which is what is happening right now in the theater, the replenishment has to come from the United States, thousands of miles. Then it has to be loaded. It has to be loaded onto aircraft, loaded onto ships. All of this takes time, and that's what this pause is all about. And I think then there will be an attempt to launch what they hope will be a war-winning offensive. And I don't think it's going to turn out that way at all. I think this is something for which the Iranians are prepared for over 20 years.
And the Americans did not?
No, of course not. Our manufacturing base has shrunken dramatically. We don't have the capacity that we did 40 or 50 years ago to surge production. We're not in the same position as Russia and China right now militarily at all. I think we just grossly miscalculated. We assumed things that were untrue. We assumed that we could bully Iran. We assumed that Iran could be isolated. And I think we completely missed the boat on the economic catastrophe that we're creating globally. You're feeling the impact of this in India. You know that your citizens are lining up in order to fill their gas tanks, and that's no pleasure. You have a similar situation in Japan. This is happening in Europe. Now, the Russians, of course, are making more than $250 million a day more than they previously did. But the Russians and the Chinese both want an end to this because they see supply chains being destroyed. And if we press ahead with this next war-winning offensive, I think that will finish off all the oil infrastructure in the Persian Gulf. Because the Iranians have said very clearly, if you attack our infrastructure, our oil infrastructure, our desalinization plants, we will wipe out everything in the Gulf. This has got to stop. And President Trump has to recognize that whatever advice he got was bad. And he ought to fire everybody working for him right now in the White House.
Maybe there's some realization that's why this attempt to shift the onus on Israel or on Pete Hegseth. But Colonel, one interesting observation you made in your last stance, which was that the Iranian warfare this time has pivoted a lot on space-based intelligence. Now, so far as I know, they do not have satellites. Who's providing them this space-based intelligence?
The Chinese and the Russians. And as a result, anything that moves within 1,000 miles of Iran is immediately identified and picked up. And that information is linked near simultaneously to all of the strike systems on the ground inside Iran. Russia and China have no interest in seeing Iran destroyed by us. They don't have any interest in seeing the society disintegrate. No one in the region wants Iran to become a basket case that the Israelis and Americans can run in, take over the oil fields in their wildest imagination, and essentially divide Iran into smaller bits and pieces, driving millions of people as refugees into Syria, Turkey, Arabia, and ultimately Europe. None of this is desirable. So again, everybody miscalculated because I think Trump listened far, far too much to the Israelis. And the Israelis promised a short, decisive war.
Yeah.
Now they're paying the ultimate price.
You mentioned the Israelis. Look at the situation in Israel, Abhishek. And Colonel, I'm sure you've gone through these reports of the Israeli Chief of Staff, Eyal Zamir. He's warned that the IDF could collapse in on itself due to the shortage of soldiers. They're
fatigue that's building.
Fatigue. And the multi-war...
Maybe not as many casualties, but the sheer fatigue of having been in a war. Remember, not for the last 1 month, for the last 2 years, 3 years.
Well, of course, keep something in mind. We don't know the true numbers of casualties for ourselves as well as for the Israelis. No one in Washington or Tel Aviv or Jerusalem is interested in telling anybody the truth right now. And this is not new. We've always slow-rolled casualties in all our wars. But right now, I suspect that we have all sustained far more casualties than we're admitting. As far as the Israelis are concerned, they've depended very heavily on air power for their military strength. They've always had a small army, a small regular force augmented by hundreds of thousands of reservists. This can't work over time. They're running out of steam, not just people, but they're exhausted. They have had lots of losses. But I think the Israelis bet heavily that we would be their infantry as well as their artillery and their air power. That hasn't worked out well.
Yep. And domestically, both Trump and Netanyahu are now facing this unique situation where there is massive opposition. Republicans themselves questioning Donald Trump. So a few of those comments come in. People are unhappy. In Israel, the opposition is questioning Netanyahu. By the way, where is Netanyahu? Nobody knows. I saw a report today, Abhishek, Colonel, that mentioned that maybe his flight was spotted in Berlin. He's been in Berlin for the last 2 weeks. I don't know where he is, but it appears extremely shady at the moment.
Yeah, you're right. I have no idea where he is. I would be careful, though, of the American situation. Go back to President Trump's State of the Union address, and when he talked about stopping Iran from having a nuclear weapon and taking whatever action was required, he got a standing ovation from virtually everybody in Congress, both Democrats and Republicans, because they've all effectively been bought by the Israel lobby. And the billionaires that back the Israel lobby have bought up these candidates. And as a result, I have almost no sympathy whatsoever for Congress. They're as culpable in all of this nonsense as is the president. But the president, if he wants to get out of this mess, should not continue to do what doesn't work. Remember the definition of insanity: doing the same thing over and over and over again in the expectation that you're going to get a different result. This next war-winning assault is not going to win the war. What he ought to do at this point is fire the people around him, step forward and say, look, I was wrong. This was a mistake. I'm disengaging. If he were willing to do that, then large numbers of people in the world, I think, leaders would come and assist him to mediate an end to this tragedy. That's one of the reasons that I mentioned Prime Minister Modi previously. But there are others that could come in as well, people that all sides could trust. That's what we desperately need. We don't need an extension of this war.
Yes. A couple of last questions, last two, and I'll take one, Abhishek, and you can take one on Kargil Island. I wanted to ask Colonel McGregor on, and you can take that, and I'll take the one on Pakistan, because you've spoken about Pakistan. You know, this joke of a country called Pakistan wants to mediate on the war. What's happening on that front? What are you hearing? Are they really mediating? Is there a mediation at all?
You know, I have my doubts. I don't know. I mean, at this point, I don't think President Trump would turn away anybody who offered help. But whether or not that means anything, I mean, he says we're holding talks. What I've seen in the past is that the CIA and Mossad will pick people out of a government, people at levels below the senior leadership, and start conversing with them in the hopes that they can be co-opted or bribed. And ultimately, that'll help us win whatever we want to win. That's not going to work with Iran. The Mossad was already in there and bought people up.
They're acting as a courier.
When he says he's talking to someone in Iran, who is he talking to?
Yeah. Well, that's the whole point. None of us really knows. And that's why I think the intelligence agencies are talking to generals or colonels or somebody somewhere in the hopes that this is going to be a breakthrough. I think it's just nonsense. I think you can't believe much of what's coming out of Washington right now. Everyone is desperate, even though we project this air of confidence. The truth is, behind the scenes, the president is quite desperate. He recognizes at this stage that he was lied to, and he made some bad calls. Well, the only way to get out of it is to admit that and disengage and ask for help from others. That's the only way. But at the moment, the plan is to do what I said before: be insane, double down on what has failed in the past and hope that it works. It's not going to happen. I don't care how many little islands they try to seize in the Persian Gulf. You put people on an island that's perhaps 14 or 15 square kilometers and a few intermediate range ballistic missiles or tactical ballistic missiles and drones, and everybody on the island is dead. This is not 1944. This is not 1984. This is 2026. Warfare is different. It's changed.
Well, it is 1984 in the sense that war is peace. But Colonel McGregor, my question is, if the weaponry is depleted, as you suggest, if the leadership is so clueless as to where to take this next, how then are you saying that the United States is going to double down? There are no weapons, there is no direction. How do you double down? You can't.
Well, that's why you have a break right now. This is why you've got this phony pause. It's not for peace talks. It's to replenish the stocks. So I think they're bringing in whatever we still have in the United States, sitting on the shelves, and bringing it out to the theater. That's what's happening to the Navy and the Air Force. And at the same time, whenever air campaigns fail historically, we then turn to the use of ground forces. That's what happened to us in Vietnam with Rolling Thunder. I went through this during the Kosovo air campaign. It lasted 78 days. And by 60 days into the campaign, it was obvious it wasn't working. And there were tremendous efforts to try and press President Clinton to commit ground forces. Ultimately, he refused to, and instead we managed to bribe the Russians to pull the plug on Milosevic in Serbia and end the campaign. This is a dumb idea. Anytime you go into any fight and you take the approach that you're going to use air power only because you don't want casualties, you're setting yourself up for failure.
Colonel McGregor, you just gave, half a dozen of the list of 83 attempts or successes that the United States has had on regime change, this time perhaps failing, But I think we are not yet over with the conversation. We'll continue to have that. Thank you so much for joining us tonight as we broaden this debate with other panelists on our program.
Yes.
Niranjan.
Thank you.